Well, this brings us to the final talk of CAOS 2024, and I'm pleased to present Katja Fiehler, who will be talking to us today about localizing objects in naturalistic environments.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. I looked it up. The last time I was here was 2010, so it's quite some time, and it's really great to be back hearing all the great, fascinating talks and talking to the people at the poster. So during my very first time, 2008, I came here a very fresh postdoc, and my first breakfast, I came down with my friend, and then we saw 𝗏𝗏𝗵𝗹𝗏, and that was the time where I started to work on the two streams model, and then we were brave enough to say hello, and then we had breakfast together. So I still remember this. That was really nice. All right, in my talk today, I focus on localizing objects in naturalistic environments. And I have to say that will be a purely behavioral talk, or as Martin just said, a no-brainer. But I think behavior is also very important to look at. So, of course, neuroscience can tell us a lot about the brain, but we shouldn't forget also to look at the behavioral level. And I will especially focus on how we code objects in space. So if you do simple movements like reaching for a coffee mug or grasping a computer mouse, this requires quite complex transformations for our brain. So in order to accurately guide the hand towards an object, we need to localize the target and the effector in space. And to accomplish this task, the brain makes use of two broad classes of reference frames. So one are egocentric reference frames, where the target object is coded relative to the observer. And there are several possibilities. So this can be relative to gaze direction, relative to body midline, but also to the position of the shoulder or the hand. With egocentric reference frames, it's quite complicated because the origin moves every time the person moves. So you need to continuously update this information, and this, of course, also adds noise in the sensory and motor systems. The second broad class of reference frames are allocentric reference frames, where the target object is coded relative to other objects in the environment, like the cup is in front of the computer lamp and right of the keyboard. So these reference frames are, of course, more stable or independent of the observer, and it has been shown that adding allocentric information can indeed improve reach accuracy and precision. And we also know that the brain makes use of both classes of reference frames. They are combined. They also depend on the sensory modality we use, also on the task we use. And in the talk today, I will especially focus on allocentric reference frames. And if I talk about allocentric reference frame, don't forget, it does not mean that we code it completely in this frame, but there's always a combination. To investigate allocentric coding of action targets, previous studies used simple and abstract stimuli, and here I present just one very representative task from Doug Crawford's group. And what they did is they had subjects fixating on a computer screen. Then they showed a target. This is this yellow dot surrounded by 4 landmarks, the blue dots. And after a delay period, they showed the landmarks again, but this time slightly shifted, and shifted only unnoticeable to the participant. And after this presentation, I think there was just a second, participants had then to reach to the remembered target location. And what they found is, what you also see here in the lower part of the image, is if they shifted the landmarks to the upper left, so here is this the blue arc, then you also see that participants reached a little bit in the direction of the object shift. And you see it for all 4 quadrants. So this was taken as evidence and also as a proxy that participants indeed use these environmental information or these landmarks to guide their reaching movement to the target location. There's also a recent review paper from Crawford's group about the neural implementation of egocentric and allocentric pathways for reaching. And based on several fMRI studies they did in humans, what they suggest is that the target direction is stored in the superior occipital gyrus, and then at the time where you plan your reach and execute your reaching movements, then this goes along the visomotor transformation stages in the posterior parietal cortex, along the intraparietal sulcus, and then projects to the dorsal premotor cortex and M1. And this also nicely corresponds to the reach network we show in 𝗞𝗁𝗙𝗵𝗵𝗵𝗵𝗏's talk yesterday. For allocentric coding, they suggest that target direction is stored in the inferior temporal gyrus, but then you need a conversion from allocentric to egocentric reference frames to have egocentric motor commands to plan and execute your reach. And they suggest 3 brain areas has been identified to participate in these ego-allo conversion. So this is the precuneus, the dorsal premotor cortex, and the pre-SMA. So from this work, based on this rather simplistic stimuli, we know that humans make use of landmark information to represent action targets. However, if you have in mind this simple display and then you walk around beautiful Rovereto, you will see that in everyday life we are surrounded by an abundance of landmarks and not just little dots. And so the fundamental question I'm asking with my group is, how can we, or which information does actually the brain uses if we are surrounded by multiple allocentric cues? So do we use every information we can get, or how do we select the relevant information? And to answer this question, we moved from simple abstract stimuli to more naturalistic computer lab settings. And as a first attempt, we created complex scenes providing rich environmental information that we present on a computer screen, and then we track eye and hand movements. And in a second step, we then also moved into virtual reality that allowed us to present objects in their real size in 3D space, and also to let subjects move through the environment. And based on a series of behavioral experiments, we identified several low-level and high-level factors that influence allocentric coding of action targets. And these are just listed here, and don't be afraid, I won't go through all of these factors, but I actually selected 4 factors, namely task relevance, the temporal characteristics, 2D versus 3D space, and object and scene semantics I would like to talk today. All right, so let's jump into the concrete experiments. So in 2014, we started this line of research, and we first wanted to know which information does the brain use to localize targets when multiple allocentric cues are available. And to answer this question, we produced photographs of this breakfast scene. And this breakfast scene always consisted of 6 table objects, you see here, and 3 what we call background objects. This was the table, the tablecloth, and the painting. And the participants' task was to encode this image as long as they wanted. And then they pressed a button, and this was followed by a delay and also a fixation cross. And they were then asked to fixate until the end of the trial to control for gaze standard spatial coding. And after this short delay, we showed the test scene again. But in this test scene, 1 object was missing. And I guess some of you already noticed which one it was. So this was the cup. And then we asked subjects to reach to the remembered location of the target. So very similar to the Byrne and Crawford study. It's important to note that we instructed participants that only objects on the table are potential reach targets, so that one of the table objects will disappear, and the task is to find it out, to identify it in this 1 second test scene, and then point to the remembered location on the computer screen. In the test scene, we manipulated the allocentric information by shifting either the table objects or the background objects to the left or to the right. And importantly, this shift was so small that participants did not notice this. And we shifted either 1, 3, or 5 table objects, all in one direction, or one of the background objects. We also had the no-shift condition just as a control condition. So if allocentric information from the objects in the scene is used to building up the spatial target representation, then we would expect a reaching endpoint or a misplacement of the reaching endpoint in the direction of the object shift. If participants solely rely on egocentric information, they are very stable, they fixated, they did not move the body, then we would not expect systematic reaching errors, or if they would rely on other allocentric information, we did not manipulate here in this study. So here I plot the overall reaching errors for leftward shifts in red and rightward shifts in green for table objects on the left and background objects on the right. And what you first can see is that we actually see a systematic shift in the direction of the landmark shift, and this is very obvious in when we shifted all 5 table objects. So we see here an increase the more objects we shifted. There was no effect if we shifted one of the background objects. To quantify this effect, we calculated then allocentric weights, and for this we first determined the reaching error in the object shift condition minus the control condition, and then we plotted this against the expected reaching error, so this is the actual physical shift of the object in the scene. We then calculated regression and took the slope, and the slope of the regression is what we define as the allocentric weight. And if we look at the allocentric weights for the table objects, we see this clear increase of allocentric weights the more table objects we shifted. However, there was nearly no effect for the background object shifts. So what we can take from this first study is that first we replicated the results by Byrne and Crawford and showed that allocentric information is used for memory-guided reaching in these naturalistic scenes. However, what we also see is that subjects do not use all information. So there are like the background information in the scene that seem not to be relevant to code the location of the reach target. However, we thought that can be multiple reasons why this is the case. One reason might be that we just shifted one background object. We also saw no shift if we shift one table object, so just a minor change in the scene might not be sufficient because you still can rely on many other very stable, reliable information. Or a second possibility could be that these background objects were not task relevant. So we instructed participants only table objects can disappear from the scene, and maybe this was the reason why we did not see an effect for shifting background objects. So we followed up on these 2 questions and also changed our stimuli from from photographs that were quite time-consuming to take to computer-generated images, and also added more background objects. So first we wanted to know, does the extent of object changes in the scene determine the use of allocentric information for reaching? And this time we shifted one background object, a table, 3 background objects, or all 5 background objects, and as a control also for the new stimulus set, also the 5 table objects. Otherwise, the experiment was the same as before. Participants first encoded the scene, we added a short mask, and then they had the task to identify the missing object and reach to the remembered target. Again, instructions were only objects on the table or potential reach targets. All right, what do we see? We first see a replication, as is nice, of our first experiment, so a clear effect of shifting reaching endpoints with the table object shift if we shift all 5 table objects. If we shift one background object, again, no effect. And interestingly, we also see no effect if we shift 3 or even all 5 background objects. So a large change in the scene did not influence reaching behavior. All right, so what's about, this is also what we see here again. We see a slight increase in when we shift more background objects, but this was not significant, and a nice replication if we shifted all table objects in the second experiment. All right, what's about task relevance? So to answer this question, we did only one simple change in the experiment. We now instructed participants that only objects in the background are potential reach targets, so they know that one of the background objects will disappear from the scene, and they should point to the remembered location of this background object. Otherwise, it was the same. We shifted 5 table objects or 1, 3, or 5 background objects. And this time you see the pattern changed. The condition where we shifted 5 table objects, where we saw in the previous 2 experiments very robust effect, no effect at all. But we now see a nice increase in the misplacement of the reaching endpoints the more background objects we shift. And if we compare the results of these 2 studies, we see that we have a similar effect of allocentric weights in a study where the table objects were task relevant, and in the second study where the background objects were task relevant. So also in the second study here, we see this nice increase in allocentric weights the more background objects we shifted. So for us, this indicates that it's task relevance that influenced the use of allocentric information for reaching. If we look at the eye movements during scene encoding, we also see here an influence of the instruction. If participants knew that the table objects were relevant, most of the fixations were really in this target area, and it looks very different if they know that one of the background objects became task relevant. So this also is consistent with results, for example, from Mary Hayhoe's lab, showing that our gaze is directed to information that we need for the task to accomplish this task. All right, so what we see here is that first, we do not use all information, and second, task relevance is a really important factor. Task irrelevant objects seem to be neglected and does not seem to influence reach behavior, at least in these studies. If you look at in the literature about allocentric coding of reach targets, we see that this is mainly based on memory-guided movements. Like situations, for example, you read in the newspaper and grasp your cup of coffee where you do not direct gaze to the target. And this also makes sense if we link it back to the 2 streams model of visual perception, where it was suggested that we have in the dorsal stream, it's predominantly processing online actions in an egocentric target representation, whereas in the ventral stream, where we have also close connections to the hippocampus, that is more responsible for memory-guided actions, and targets are stored in an allocentric target representation. However, this distinction is not as sharp as shown here. There are also many interactions between the 2 streams, and even there are some recent results, for example, from Alexander Geil's lab, from monkey electrophysiology, where they showed egocentric and allocentric coding in the same dorsal stream areas and even partly also in the same neurons. So it seems to be that egocentric and allocentric coding is more widespread in the dorsal as well as in the ventral stream. And this inspired us to also ask the question, do we see allocentric coding not only in memory-guided actions, but also in real-time action. And this is not, or for us, we had some time to come up with a good experiment to really investigate this in the behavioral lab. And to probe allocentric coding in visually guided and memory-guided movements, we applied a trick to shift objects unnoticed to the participants while they blink. So they did not like the experiment because they got little air puffs to their right eye, and these air puffs forced a blink. And we used this blinking time to shift the objects. And the shifts were always quite small, so like 3 to 5 visual degrees. So participants usually do not notice this, even if you have quite large changes in the scene, like in the previous experiments. And we did this shift in 3 different conditions. So we first had the memory-guided delay condition, where participants again encoded the scene. This time we also instructed participants about the reach target. So the reach target was here indicated with the little red circle. Then they received the air puff, and this was followed by the blink. We shifted the object during the blink, and this was even followed by a short delay. Then came the go cue, and participants then had the same task to reach to the remember target. Note that this time they knew the target, so they were actually able to already plan the movement at this stage, but we know that subjects usually plan reaching movements at the time of the go cue. And at the time of the go cue, they had no visual information of the target, so therefore it was memory guided. In the second condition, that was our memory-guided no delay condition. Very similar here, they got the air puff at the time of the go cue. So that it means also here at the stage of reach planning, they had no visual information of the target. So therefore, that was also memory-guided, but this time without an additional delay. And our important condition was now the online condition. So in the online condition, participants actually received the go cue before they received the air puff. So they encoded the target, they received the go cue, they could now plan the reaching movement with the visual information about the target, here the apple. Then they received the air puff while they had already started the movement. We shifted the object, and then they reached to the remember target. So the idea was, if participants rely on allocentric information also during these online actions, we should see an influence of the object shifts even in this last condition. If we purely rely on egocentric representation, they plan the reach right from the start and then just perform it, we shouldn't see any influence. All right, so what I show you here is first the reach trajectories. So we see it here for the 2 memory-guided conditions. You see that subjects quite early in the reach start to deviate, depending on whether they shifted the objects to the left or to the right. Our important condition was now here the online condition. So where we have here this shaded area where there was the eye blink and the object shift. And you see that subjects started more straight, and right at the end of the reach, they started to deviate to the left or to the right. So it seems that they do online update the allocentric information, the landmark information, and accordingly adjust the reaching movement. If you compare the allocentric weights across the 3 conditions, we see an influence in all 3 conditions, but what you also recognize is that still the strongest effects are there for the memory-guided conditions. So here we have the strongest influence of the landmark shift and a weaker influence overall in the online reach condition. So these results show that allocentric coding also contributes to spatial coding of online actions, but we see an overall stronger effect for memory-guided movements. All right, so As I said at the beginning, the main or one of the goals of our experiments is also to move more into naturalistic environments. And you can say, well, it's more complex to use scenes, but they are 2D and still quite far away from our real world. So therefore, we moved into virtual reality, where we can present objects in 3D. And we know, for example, from studies from 𝗞𝗏𝗵𝗹𝗶𝗵𝗵 or Jackie Snow, that there are differences on the behavioral and on the neural level how we process 2D and 3D objects. And for us, virtual reality is quite a nice tool to be very precise and controllable for our experiments, to show exactly what we want to show to the subjects without additional influences, and also to combine it with motion tracking, eye tracking, and whole body tracking. And one of the first studies we did with a very old HDMI system was that we first wanted to see what happens if we shift objects in depth, what we could not do before if we use computer-generated images. So we presented our breakfast scene in a virtual reality like this one. We tracked the hand movements. You also need to calibrate then your movements in virtual space. So therefore, participants just saw the fingertip as a small red ball so that they know where their finger was. And we matched the virtual tabletop with the real tabletop. So if they pointed to the table, that they also got the haptic feedback. We presented the objects also at 3 different depth levels, because we were interested in if we see differences depending on the distance of the participant, but it was all within reach space, so they could point to the remembered target objects. And first we wanted to replicate, do we see the same effects in 3D as we saw on the computer screen? And therefore we shifted the objects first horizontally to the left or to the right. And yes, we see very similar results. So this was promising, a more a sanity check that it also works in VR. If we compare it also with the other study, we see very comparable allocentric weights for the monitor experiment and the same experiment in VR. In the next step, we examined allocentric coding of reach targets in depth, where we shifted objects away from the subjects or towards the subjects. Otherwise, the task was as before. And we also manipulated the size of the object. So this is a monocular depth Q, where our idea was that if subjects use these size Qs, then if we change size, they should also mislocalize the object. So we had the natural condition, where the objects naturally changed in size depending on the depth. But we also had this magnification condition, where we magnified objects by 10%. If we moved it towards the subject, they got just bigger, so they have the perception that it's even closer than it actually is, or smaller if we moved it away. And the conflict condition, where we just reverse the effect. And we were interested in how this affects allocentric coding. So I show you here the results. So first what we see is, yes, we see also allocentric coding in depth. There's a clear effect here depending on if we shift objects towards or away of the subjects. And we also see a clear influence of the change in size. So with the magnification effect, we have stronger allocentric weights. So that means subjects indeed pointed further away than the object was actually was in the shift direction. And we had this reversed effect if we compare it to no change in the conflict condition. So we see that these monocular depth Qs are also used to localize the target and to then plan and execute your reaching movement. All right. And this brings me to the final part of my talk that might connect also with the talks from Martin and others that presented us on scene and object semantics. And this is the latest direction we are going in the lab, and I'm quite excited about it, to combine spatial coding also with scene perception, because these are two communities that are usually so far not very well connected, but I think it's very important if we now move into more naturalistic environments, we have scenes and objects around us, so we need to take this also into account. So what we know from previous work is that objects that are semantically similar facilitates grouping and also the formation of spatial representation. However, at this time, what we did not know is object semantics influence allocentric coding of objects for reaching. And to answer this question, we used the multi-arrangement method that was also presented here several times to quantify the semantic similarity between the objects, because we wanted to have just a quantitative measure of how close these objects, how similar they are. So, what participants did, they dragged and dropped these objects in the arena. And I can't stop this. We did not ask subjects to apply a specific similarity criterion, but rather to let them spontaneously arrange the objects in the arena. And this process was then iterated several times, and the idea is that objects are represented in this metric high-dimensional feature space where nearer distances correspond to objects of the same class. And based on the data of this multi-arrangement task, we use then multidimensional scaling to obtain these representational dissimilarity matrix that codes the dissimilarity of each pair of objects. And darker colors here represent objects with closer semantic distance, so they are more similar, and lighter colors that are more dissimilar. So if we zoom in, we see actually a high semantic similarity for examples between different tools or different fruits and vegetables. And based on these semantic distance, we then selected two clusters of objects that were very homogeneous and similar within the cluster, but very dissimilar between the other cluster. And this was first natural objects, fruits, and second, man-made objects. What we also did then in a second step is that we wanted that these objects are also dissimilar in shape. So subjects did then, in a second iteration, also these multi-arrangement method based on shape and based on semantic similarity. And based on this, we then selected objects that were very dissimilar in shape and similar within the category. These 6 objects were then used in our object shift paradigm as we did before. And this allowed us now to create conditions that were semantically congruent or incongruent. So, for example, if the target was a banana and we shifted then the apple and the pear, this would be then a semantically congruent shift. But if the target is a banana and we, for example, shifted the stapler and the pen case, then that would be an incongruent condition. Okay, let's see if these more high-level factors influence indeed these quite low-level allocentric coding mechanism. And indeed it did, and we were quite surprised how big the difference was. So I plot here the congruent shift condition where we have clear allocentric weights, about 30%. And the incongruent condition, here the effect is more than twice smaller than in the congruent condition. So we indeed see quite a big effect of semantic congruency, and this was irrespective of the man-made objects or natural objects. So we see that object semantics can facilitate spatial clustering and also boost allocentric coding of action targets. But how does it look like if we move up the hierarchy? And if you know Melissa Vo's work, you might also know this figure with this scene grammar hierarchy Melissa is proposing, where we have the object level at the lowest level here, and then the next higher level would be the anchors, and anchors are defined as large immovable objects. These anchor objects also provide information about where you can find the local objects, and are also predictive of specific local objects. So for example, here, if you have a toilet, you would expect a toilet paper close to it or a toilet brush, but not like in the bathroom, the shower gel maybe, or the brush. At the next level, you can then build phrases where you put together anchors and local objects, and then at the highest level of the hierarchy, you have the complete scene. And the experiments I showed you so far are all at this lowest level here at the local object level. And we were interested what happens now if we move up the hierarchy and shift anchor objects. Do we see similar effects and similar also semantic congruency effects at the anchor level? And here we used 4 different virtual scenes, 2 kitchen scenes and 2 bathroom scenes, and each scene contained 2 anchor objects. And these anchor objects, we combined them with a white shelf. And we placed then the local objects on this white shelf in each of these virtual scenes. We selected the local objects in a way that they were either congruent with the anchor objects, like we have here a toilet paper or a toilet brush with the toilet, or they were incongruent with the anchor object. And let's see if it works. So the participants' task was, you should see it here. So they saw in virtual reality this scene for a very short time, the object. So it's really short. Then one of the target objects float in front of them. They grab the objects with the, I can also go back with the controller, and then have to place it back exactly at the location where they saw the object before. And the task is quite challenging because you see it really only for a very short time. So I'll show you this again. So first the scene, they can look around how long they want, then they press a button and mask shortly the objects, and then they move through the room and place it back. We did not instruct them to take care of the orientation, just the right location. All right, so we were quite impressed that we see indeed an effect of the anchor object shifts. So I forgot to tell you that we shifted one of the anchor objects to the left or to the right, or no anchor shift, as in the previous study. So if we shift one anchor object to the left, we also see that they place this object a bit more to the left, and also if we place it to the right, we see the opposite effect. So it's very similar to what we showed before in the monitor experiments. However, if we look at congruency, there's no effect at all. So they have what you see, a slight leftward shift as in the no shift condition and the control condition, but really no effect here at the anchor level. And our first idea was, maybe the congruency is not is too strong, because all the local objects we had were semantically congruent with the scene. So they were bathroom objects in the bathroom. And of course, our idea was if we shift the sink and then the target object is the toilet paper, we shouldn't see an effect. But if it's like the hand soap, then we should see one. Maybe we need to increase the semantic congruency. And this is what we did in the next experiment. I will come back to this one. So where we now chose really incongruent objects, that means This time in the follow-up study, we presented like the espresso cooker in the bathroom. So we increased the congruency or the dissimilarity of the objects. We again find the shift effect, so this seems to be quite robust if we shift anchor objects, but again there was no congruency effect at the anchor level. And this is the stage where we are currently and are still with puzzling if it's the experiment, if it's like we designed the semantic similarity, or maybe there are other factors as well. And what I forgot to show you before is that we also recorded eye movements in the task. And what you see here is that subjects mainly fixated, which is also clear, at the local objects here in the center. Especially during encoding and also during the response when they place it there, they have hardly any fixations at the anchor objects. However, we see the strong influence on the anchor object shift. And if you now go back in memory, what I told you in the second experiment is that task relevance is so important. We were quite surprised to see this effect that the anchors have, because for performing the task, you can really neglect this. So it might be just a matter of size, that it's not related to the anchor. It's even big enough that you don't need to saccade at these objects directly. We will see. All right, but what we can say is that anchor objects, or just large objects, represent strong allocentric cues, irrespective so far of their semantic congruency with the local objects. And this brings me also to close to the end of my talk. So in a recent review paper, we summarized these low-level and high-level factors influencing object localization for action. And we also put forward some future direction where we think might be fruitful to move the field. So first is to continue to investigate spatial coding in more naturalistic environments, because this is what we want to understand. Even maybe to go into the real world now with the mobile headsets, mobile eye tracking, that might also be already possible. Also to combine research on spatial coding and scene perception, as I already said. In our task, it's also there are working memory effects, there are attention effects, there are many cognitive factors as well that can influence the results. So these fields need to move together. And also to study spatial coding across spatial scales. Because this seems also to be quite different communities. So the studies we so far do are all in figural space. So there's this classification from Montello with the 4 different spaces, and the figural space is what you have like in front of you. So it's like on your desk. And you can go even one step further in the vista space, like we did in the last experiment, where subjects can walk, so it's walkable space. But you can then even think a little bit bigger in the environmental space, where you really need to locomote to reach your target. And even if you go a little bit further, then you're at geographical space, where you can need a map actually to localize something. And of course, if we work in this figural and vista space, we mainly focus on the posterior parietal cortex function. People interested in locomotion, navigation, or more look at these hippocampal networks. But how is the intersection? How, if you move from one space to the next, how does this work? And I think these are interesting questions to move forward and maybe bring the fields of spatial cognition and space perception for action a little bit closer together. All right, and with this, I would like to thank you for your attention. These are the people that worked on the studies I presented today, and my collaborators for the experiments I showed you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. The floor is open for questions. Well, while you're formulating your questions, I have one. I wonder what you mean by egocentric. And because egocentric is a big word, and it could mean, for example, gaze-centered, it could mean torso-centered, it could mean in relation to your hand. Does that constitute a kind of allocentric, egocentric combination? I just wonder if you could expand on what you mean by egocentric.
Yeah, so I did not show you studies today on egocentric coding, and of course for reaching gaze-centered coding is a prominent reference frames that is used. But this is just one possibility. But what we showed in previous experiments, for example, is if we shift gaze to the left or to the right, that we also see these mislocalization of reach endpoints that are used as a proxy that you code your target representation relative to gaze location.
Sure. But I was wondering, presumably you have to compute where the object is with respect to your hand in order to get your hand to the object. So what kind of computation is that? And are both referred to a gaze-centered frame of reference in order to do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, at the end, as you said, you need to know where your hand is because you want to move your hand to the target. So it needs to be converted at the end in a hand-centered reference frame, I would say, to reach to the target. So you need this conversion. And the idea from Crawford and Chen in this paper is that for the allocentric reference frame that you convert it at the early stage that is possible. So it's more in the allocentric code while you store the information, while you hold this active, but as soon as you get now the impulse now you want to reach, or you get your go cue, then you start the conversion directly into the egocentric reference frames.
So have you or others explored where situations where you might move the hand in a memory-guided situation to see whether or not you disrupt the nature of the final reaching movement, or is that conversion happen as a just-in-time computation as you initiate the graph?
Yes, I think that is the idea, that it's just-in-time conversion of the information. I'm not aware of a study where they actually moved the hand. I mean, what people did is, but this goes then back to sensory motor adaptation, where you have a visual representation of your hand, but the hand goes to another direction. Or you slightly move the orientation of the hand that you are not aware of it, and then it will also influence your movement at the end. So, right.
All right, we have a couple of questions here.
Thank you. I have a question on your second last bullet. So I'm trying to get my head around what might be the underlying process here. So do you think this is due to some category-based attention that is prepared by showing the object that is then either congruent or not congruent with what comes after, or what's your speculation here or your hypothesis?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, you see that the objects are only shown for a very brief time. So it needs to be a very fast process where you categorize the objects already. So in this sense, I would say it's, so what previous studies showed also, especially for fruits, is that you have an advantage of spatial clustering if you have objects that are very similar. So, and this is more like an automatic process. And if you look at the time, I mean, 1 second is in this sense short. For the brain, it's a long time. But I don't think that's an attention effect, or
This was not to dismiss it. Might be an interesting category-specific attention effect.
Yeah.
So,
maybe, yeah.
Or other people might think of it as spreading activation in a semantic network, right? So, and I don't even know where to draw the boundary. So
yeah, that's true. So where is you start the one process and where the other? Yeah, it's a good question. So I would, it could be semantic attention to this. I would say it's more like for me, an automatic categorization process if we look at these objects. We also looked at the semantic distance then for all pairs of objects. So like if we also performed other experiments where here we had the strongest candidates, where we really showed that these three fruits are highly similar, but then we created also combinations that they had a medium similarity range and a very low one, and also looked at the allocentric weights, and this was a gradual decrease. So it seemed to be related to the semantic strength, how strong this effect is.
Okay, but to add on, as a follow-up, so if you say it's an automatic, or it might be an automatic categorization of what? So what is it that is automatically categorized?
So here we have the man-made natural objects, so these two clusters.
But how? I mean, if you're saying automatic, it needs to come from somewhere, right? Why is it?
Yeah. So how does this develop? Is the question, right? I mean, we can't answer this with this study, right? There are some studies from the linguistic domain. We also looked into this, where we also see that these linguistic clusters develop with language processing. That might be one possibility, but I have no better answer to this, but there might be ideas in the room.
Okay, thank you.
Angelica, there was a question behind you. Maybe you could hand the microphone.
Thank you for your talk. As far as I understood, I hope it was correct, only the virtual reality experiment within the table and the pointing finger, in that the subject received active feedback, right? From touching sensation. Okay. Do you think that even though the results are consistent, the sensory feedback played a role in that, or it can be even disregarded, given that the other experiment didn't have that? But do you think that for ego-allocentric transformation could it be useful?
They always had haptic feedback. Also in the other experiments, so they touched on the computer screen, so they were also a touch screen. This time they also had haptic feedback, so this was in this sense controlled for it. I don't think that would be related to it, because it's not a matter of the object itself, right? It's quite a neutral surface you have in both experiments. So
yeah, I was wondering mostly for also what you were saying for the action related to your hand. So it's shifting and you receive active feedback in different places. So I was wondering just for that.
Yeah, I mean, we know that haptic feedback is an important factor, especially when it comes to grasp something. And I think this is the downside in the virtual reality, that we so far don't have the haptic feedback. It might develop now, also with the data gloves. That might be something to look into this, and this would be then more natural. I think this is still, the disadvantage with VR, that you are missing this important information as well. Therefore, we went only for reaching movements, or now this displacement task. However, you could also answer, floating object with the controller, how realistic is this one, but it's now as close as we get, but it would be nicer to have then also the haptic representation.
Thank you.
I think Brad has a question. We could get the microphone there.
Thank you, and for this beautiful talk. So I was curious if I understood, when the object shifts, it doesn't change its perspective at all. I mean, it's not like the state. And I was curious if you had the situation where all the objects shift, but they rotate commensurate with the degree of shifts. Does the kind of like a head movement, like do you now interpret it as an egocentric move? And that's part one. And part two is, if you do interpret it as an egocentric move, do you no longer get effects of the semantic variables?
I don't know this with respect to the semantic variables, but what we did in another experiment is where we virtually shifted the person to the left or to the right. So this was like inducing a sideward step. What we see is that, and we looked at egocentric and allocentric coding in this study, that the egocentric coding went down. So it was like, so we adding more variability in the system with the sideward step of the, or the sideward shift of the participant, and the allocentric coding got stronger in this condition. If there is, it's a really good idea, and this is something we also had in mind, not that we shift the perspective of the object, but actually let subjects move around the table and then point to the target object. Because with an allocentric reference frame, you would expect that you have these relative coding of objects. Of course, then you need to also update your own egocentric representation to it. I would still expect these shift effects that we see this, but like in the previous study, because of the updating of the egocentric representation, there might be overall more noise in the system and therefore an overall smaller effect. I don't know how it will affect the semantic congruency here.
Yeah, one more back here.
Thank you for the talk. That's a very nice series of studies. My question is whether you can take this from the space domain to the feature domain, and whether you effects. So if you, for example, you change the location of the objects, but what would happen if you would change the color? So if you would play with color, the question would be about color. You would have like a slider and you would have to say how pink something is, for example, and then the objects would change in how pink they are. I mean, you could do the same with aspect ratio of the objects and so on. So I could imagine that you could take the same design and do that in feature space. Would you expect the same kind of things to happen? So you would expect the shifts, effects of the semantic similarity, then you had the anchoring thing. Would you also expect that to happen, or do you expect something completely different?
So first, what I did not tell you in the very first study, of course, where we did the photographs, we had some colorful objects in it, like the blue cup, and then we had some objects that were more grayish. So we looked also at the effects of each single item with respect also to saliency. And we did not find any effect. So it does not seem in general that more salient objects also produce stronger effects. And I think that goes nicely with the direction that task relevancy is a very strong factor that can overrule these low-level perceptual effects. Second, there was also spatial proximity was also something you will find in the literature, that it might affect allocentric coding. This was also not what we saw, but I have to say that the objects are still in a quite small range. If you change now the, do you mean we would change the color from the encoding to the test?
Yeah, so what you would ask people about the color of one of the objects, so no longer the position. So it would no longer be a reaching task. So I know for you this is totally out of what you would normally do, but suppose I would be interested in objects, in their features and color, for example, and so I would do the same task with color. So you take an object away and you ask about its color, but then you keep all the other objects the same in their color, or you would change one or three or five of them in color. The indicated color of the disappeared object, would that also change in the same direction as you expect? Would there be an effect of whether they are task relevant or not? These kind of questions could be asked there as well.
I mean, indeed, color. So in another experiment, not on spatial coding, but that was more on individual and ensemble perception, we got interested in because we worked with the scenes. And we were interested, do subjects really encode also the identity of the object? Because the identity, yes, is here also important, but not as if you then ask, point to the banana. Here's just see where the missing object is in general. And what we see is that subjects get confused if you have two red objects in the scene because they only see it for a very short time. And then they, for example, point to the wrong location because they mix up color. So they code this in a feature space, if you will, say, in this direction. So colors seem to be important, at least what we see from these studies. So they take it into account and then, yeah, get confused or couldn't find the object again.
Oh yeah, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Before we thank Katja, I just want to say, don't leave, because I have a few things to say. Thank you, Katja.